George Russell set the fastest lap, Mercedes celebrated like they had escaped the storm, and then the FIA started asking questions. Because what happened after that lap may have exposed something Formula One teams have been whispering about for weeks. Telemetry spikes. Unusual straight-line gains. Rival teams immediately demanding answers. And now, according to paddock speculation surrounding the situation, Mercedes suddenly find themselves at the center of another FIA investigation just when the championship is reaching its breaking point. But here's the part nobody expected. The suspicious lap was not messy. It was perfect. Too perfect. Russell looked untouchable through every sector, pulling time in places where the car should not even have been strongest. Engineers from rival teams reportedly noticed it immediately. McLaren noticed. Ferrari noticed. Red Bull definitely noticed. And within minutes, the entire paddock atmosphere changed. Because this is not only about one lap anymore. This is about whether Mercedes found something the FIA was never supposed to allow. And if that fastest lap really exposed a hidden advantage, the consequences could completely change the championship fight overnight. The moment George Russell crossed the line with the fastest lap, something felt wrong inside the paddock. Not wrong because the lap was fast. Formula One drivers produce fast laps every weekend. This felt different. The timing shocked people. The sectors shocked people. But more than anything else, rival teams were shocked by where Mercedes suddenly found the speed. Because according to engineers watching the telemetry data unfold live, Russell was gaining massive time in areas where the Mercedes car had not looked dominant earlier in the weekend. And that is the kind of thing that immediately triggers suspicion in Formula One. Think about it like a sprinter suddenly breaking records, not on the straight part of the track where they normally dominate, but somehow accelerating faster coming out of every corner too. Everyone notices instantly. That is exactly what happened with Russell's lap. The onboard looked smooth, calm, almost effortless. No major corrections. No visible instability. Just clean speed through every phase of the lap. And this is where the atmosphere inside the garages changed completely. Because rival teams started comparing the data immediately. McLaren engineers reportedly focused on the straight-line gains. Ferrari became interested in the traction zones. Red Bull began questioning how the Mercedes suddenly looked so planted under acceleration. Each team was looking at different parts of the lap. But all of them were asking the same question. Where did this performance come from? And here's why that question became dangerous for Mercedes. The FIA had already been under pressure for weeks regarding Mercedes' performance. Rival teams had complained repeatedly about possible advantages linked to engine behavior, cooling systems, and power deployment patterns. So when Russell suddenly delivered a lap that looked almost too efficient, suspicion exploded instantly. Not publicly at first. Quietly. Inside engineering rooms. Inside strategy meetings. Over private radio channels between team personnel. Because in Formula One, teams study each other obsessively. Every speed trace. Every braking point. Every tiny movement on track. If one car suddenly behaves differently, people notice within seconds. And according to paddock discussion surrounding the lap, the unusual consistency of the Mercedes performance became one of the biggest talking points. That sounds small, but it isn't. Normally, when drivers push for a fastest lap, the car looks nervous somewhere. Maybe slight wheel spin. A small lockup. Tiny corrections through high-speed corners. Russell's lap looked almost clinical. Which immediately created another theory spreading through the paddock. What if Mercedes were managing something differently electronically? Now, there is no confirmed evidence publicly proving illegal systems or rule-breaking. That distinction matters enormously. But Formula One investigations often begin long before anyone officially announces concerns. And the FIA paying closer attention after a suspiciously strong performance is not unusual at all. That is how this sport works. Teams push boundaries constantly. The FIA reacts. Then rival teams push political pressure even harder. And suddenly, one fastest lap becomes far more than one fastest lap. It becomes a trigger. A reason to investigate deeper. A reason to recheck data. A reason to examine systems teams normally keep hidden behind layers of secrecy. And this is where things became uncomfortable for Mercedes themselves. Because George Russell's lap did not happen in isolation. It happened during a period where the entire paddock was already watching Mercedes more closely than almost any other team on the grid. That changes everything psychologically. Every strong sector suddenly looks suspicious. Every acceleration point becomes a discussion. Every onboard clip gets analyzed frame by frame online by fans, analysts, and rival engineers. And the pressure inside Mercedes starts growing rapidly when that happens. Because even if a team believes they are completely legal, investigations create distraction. Engineers become careful with communication. Drivers get flooded with questions. Team principals are forced into defensive interviews. And rivals smell vulnerability immediately. But here's the deeper problem Mercedes may now face. If the FIA investigation keeps escalating, people will not only question the fastest lap. They will start questioning every dominant performance Mercedes produced this season. What makes situations like this so explosive in Formula One is that investigations almost never stay focused on one single moment. They spread. One suspicious lap becomes a broader conversation. Then suddenly, every rival team starts revisiting old data, old races, old telemetry comparisons, searching for patterns they may have missed earlier in the season. And that may already be happening around Mercedes. Because once engineers begin suspecting an unusual advantage, they stop looking at isolated performance. They start looking for consistency across multiple weekends. That is where things can become dangerous. Imagine noticing one student getting a perfect score on a test. At first, maybe it looks impressive. But if teachers suddenly realize that students solved every difficult question faster than everyone else in exactly the same way each time, they start asking deeper questions. That is how Formula One teams think. Patterns matter more than moments. And according to growing paddock discussion, some rival teams now believe Russell's fastest lap exposed a performance pattern that had been building quietly for weeks. Not necessarily obvious to fans, but obvious to engineers. Because engineers see details normal viewers never notice. Tiny differences in acceleration curves, battery deployment behavior, how quickly a car reaches top speed after corner exit, how stable the rear stays under power. These details are like fingerprints in Formula One. Every car leaves them behind. And when one fingerprint suddenly changes dramatically, people start investigating immediately. This is why the FIA situation could become much larger than Mercedes expected. Because now rival teams reportedly want more scrutiny, not less. McLaren do not want to lose ground in the championship because of something they believe deserves deeper examination. Ferrari have spent months trying to understand Mercedes' straight-line performance gains. Red Bull, historically one of the most politically aggressive teams in Formula One, are never passive when they sense possible technical gray areas. And here's where the pressure becomes brutal for Mercedes. The team cannot simply dismiss concerns emotionally. In Formula One, acting defensive often makes suspicion worse. So now Mercedes face an incredibly delicate balancing act. Stay calm publicly. Cooperate with the FIA. Protect internal secrets. And avoid showing even the smallest signs of panic. That is much harder than it sounds. Because internally, teams hate investigations. Not only because of potential penalties. Because investigations disrupt focus. Every meeting changes. Engineers lose time answering technical questions. Data departments become overloaded preparing reports. Management gets pulled into political conversations instead of race preparation. And drivers start feeling the pressure too. Especially George Russell. Because suddenly, every future lap he produces will carry extra attention. If he dominates again, suspicion grows louder. If performance drops, rivals will claim the FIA's scrutiny changed something. That is the trap Mercedes may now be entering. And this is where Formula One becomes psychological warfare as much as engineering competition. Because rival teams understand something very important. Even if no rule has officially been broken, public suspicion alone can destabilize a championship campaign. The pressure starts leaking everywhere. Fans debate every onboard clip online. Journalists begin asking loaded questions during interviews. Former drivers speculate publicly on television. And the FIA itself faces growing pressure to prove they are fully investigating the situation seriously. That can snowball incredibly fast. We have seen this before in Formula One history. Sometimes teams are cleared completely. Sometimes tiny technical interpretations trigger massive controversies. Sometimes investigations reveal nothing at all, but the political damage already changes the season anyway. And that last possibility may be the one Mercedes fear most right now. Because even if they are entirely legal, the narrative surrounding Russell's fastest lap has already escaped their control. People are no longer only talking about speed. They are talking about legitimacy. And once Formula One reaches that stage, every single race weekend becomes heavier. Every radio message gets analyzed. Every setup change creates rumors. Every dominant sector time fuels another wave of speculation. But here's what makes the situation even more dangerous. The FIA investigation may not only affect Mercedes technically. It could affect the relationship between drivers, teams, and rivals across the entire championship fight. Because while Mercedes are trying to defend themselves externally, pressure may already be building internally too. Inside Mercedes, the situation may already be becoming far more complicated than the public realizes. Because Formula One teams can survive pressure from rival teams. They can survive media criticism. What becomes dangerous is when doubt starts entering the garage itself. And George Russell now sits directly at the center of that pressure. Think about the position Mercedes suddenly find themselves in. If the FIA investigation continues growing, every person inside the team starts asking difficult questions internally. Not necessarily because they believe rules were broken. Because they understand what is at stake. Championships, reputations, careers. One technical controversy can change the direction of an entire season almost overnight. And for Russell personally, the timing could not be more intense. He is already fighting for control inside Mercedes. His performances have started shifting momentum away from Kimi Antonelli. The team sees him delivering under pressure. Rival teams see him as the face of Mercedes' resurgence. Now suddenly, every success he achieves risks being viewed through suspicion. That creates enormous psychological pressure for a driver. Because Formula One drivers live through confidence. Confidence under braking. Confidence in wheel-to-wheel battles. Confidence that the team behind them is stable and protected. The moment external noise starts growing, that confidence becomes harder to maintain. And this is where things could become extremely uncomfortable between Russell and Antonelli. Because internal rivalries always become more volatile when outside pressure appears. Imagine two teammates already fighting over leadership inside a company. Then suddenly the company itself becomes investigated publicly. Every small disagreement becomes bigger. Every mistake becomes political. That is exactly the environment Mercedes may now be entering. Antonelli is already under pressure after losing momentum against Russell. The young Italian reacted emotionally during recent team battles. Russell, meanwhile, has looked composed and increasingly confident. Now add FIA scrutiny on top of that. Suddenly, even normal team decisions become dangerous. Who gets priority strategy? Who receives new components first? Whose setup direction does the team trust more? These questions already create tension during title fights. An investigation multiplies that tension dramatically. Because drivers start protecting themselves psychologically. Nobody wants to become the public face of controversy if things escalate later. And this is where Toto Wolff faces one of the hardest management situations in modern Formula One. He must protect the team externally while keeping the garage united internally. That sounds simple. It is not. Because Formula One garages operate like pressure cookers. 24 race weekends. Constant travel. Endless media attention. Millions of dollars at stake every weekend. Now imagine trying to maintain calm while rival teams are questioning your performance publicly and the FIA starts paying closer attention to your data. Every engineer feels it. Every mechanic feels it. Every driver definitely feels it. And here's what makes this situation even more dangerous for Mercedes long term. Formula One politics never disappear quickly. Once a narrative begins, rival teams keep pushing it repeatedly. If Mercedes dominate another weekend, suspicion returns. If Russell sets another extraordinary lap, people compare it immediately to the investigated one. If the FIA says nothing publicly, rivals increase political pressure behind closed doors. That cycle can continue for months. We have seen it happen throughout Formula One history repeatedly. And sometimes the psychological impact becomes more damaging than any actual technical ruling. Because teams start operating defensively instead of aggressively. Engineers become afraid to innovate freely. Drivers become careful with public comments. Management becomes obsessed with controlling narratives instead of maximizing performance. That shift is subtle at first. Then suddenly, championships begin slipping away. And maybe the most dangerous part for Mercedes is this. Their rivals do not necessarily need the FIA to punish Mercedes directly anymore. If the investigation alone creates distraction, stress, and instability inside the team, the political strategy may already be working. McLaren can capitalize. Ferrari can capitalize. Red Bull absolutely knows how to capitalize in situations like this. Because while Mercedes answer questions about legality, everybody else keeps focusing purely on racing. And in a championship this close, even tiny distractions can decide everything. But there is one final layer to this story that makes the entire situation feel even heavier. Because according to growing paddock tension, the FIA investigation may not only be about one fastest lap anymore. It may be about whether Formula One's balance of power is shifting into another political war entirely.